Story time with the Histories. With your hosts, Matt Marine and Jen Dumas.
Presented by Anchor FM.
So this was that time right at the crossover point when we were coming back from COVID online teaching. Remember, you didn't know any of your students and you didn't have any set relationships, but it was also really weird because 2/3 of the school year almost were done. And so I have these kids, they're coming into the room. It's one of those classes, there should have been 64 people, but there's only 8 or 9 in the room. Remember I told you about that class I had that year?
Yeah, and is everybody still wearing a mask so you can't identify them
You
come hell or
can
high water?
barely hear them. You don't, I don't know any of their faces.
Yeah.
I know whatever weird profile pic they had. And this one kid comes in and he's talking pretty loud. He's got the mask on and I'm at the computer setting everything up. And he's telling the 3 other kids who are in the room, yeah, I just got done. Right before, class started, I was listening to this ska music. I was just kind of wasting some time. And by the way, I think it's okay if I tell this story because he has since graduated. So he's not going to hear this or get upset. Yeah. So statute of limitations has passed on that. So anyways, I pop up from the computer. I'm super excited. This kid's talking about ska. I love ska.
I know you do.
And I almost run over to him. And remember, we've known each other for probably 2 class periods and it's February. And I'm like, oh, dude, what ska bands do you like? I'm totally music nerding out. Oh, dude, the syncopation, the horns. This kid, he shamelessly looks me in the eye. This is our first ever real life IRL interaction. And he's like, I was being sarcastic. Ska sucks.
Ouch, yeah. Matt.
I know. I was he's like, it's not cool. He starts giving me the whole anti-ska fair, we're going to talk about it. But since that moment in time, I have needed to do this episode.
I get that. I was first introduced to ska. Oh my God. I think I was 9 or 10 years old. My cousin, Sean, who was about 4 years older than me, the first band he ever introduced to me was the English Beat.
Oh yeah. I love them.
And just that started my love affair for alternative music. So I'm on your side on this one.
Yeah, dude, the English Beat's great. You know what? You're going to be upset about this. So they were in town 2019. They were opening up for Rancid. And I obviously went to that show.
Right.
And I missed the English Beat. We missed the people we were with. They were hungry. They wanted to get some food. And then things took longer. And when we got down there, their set was over.
Nice. Classic.
I know.
Classic.
I know. I have
Ladies and
regrets.
gentlemen, welcome to Storytime with the Historist with your hosts, Jen Dumas and Matt Barine. This is the podcast focused on world history, the stories that are sometimes bizarre, often entertaining, and always factual. Today, we will be discussing skanking and cranking as we improve our way and our knowledge through the history of ska. Skanking was the first dance I learned how to do.
It's the first dance everybody learns how to do. Yeah, but it's the first dance you learn, and then you never want to show anybody.
I'm totally proud of it. I would totally show everybody.
I remember the first time I had to do it. We'll get into it. Later in the show, we got a whole uncle music, aunt music corner that we can take the listeners through. But before we get into that, let's acknowledge our sources for this episode. We relied heavily on a book, Ska, Rocksteady, and Reggae, A Brief History by Wayne LaRiche. I think I'm saying that correctly, which very informative, suffered from not having an editor. And
yuck, yeah,
you can only read so many poorly constructed and crafted sentences in a row before you start to wonder, is this self-published information? And if so, is this reliable? So to fact check and corroborate the information in the book, we also used Ongoing History of New Music. It has a series. It's a podcast and a series, and Not So Brief History of Ska. It's a 2-parter, about an hour long for both episodes combined there. And we also used Vice Media's Noisy series, Under the Influence, Two-Tone Ska. And I got to say, LaRiche can barely craft a sentence. His historical knowledge, great. So recommend it for those pain pigs who want to learn more about a music scene and have zero cares about grammar.
You should never have zero cares about grammar,
I know.
ever.
Well, I said that certain people don't care about grammar.
Oh my God, how could you even read it? All right.
Yeah, I know.
So I guess my question to you is, because I never knew this, I never thought of ska as a joke, but you
Like
came to
goofy
me,
music.
a couple of months ago, and you're like, do you know that there's a lot of people out there who don't take ska seriously? I'm like,
Oh
what? Are
yeah,
you kidding?
yeah.
Why? What's
Well,
the deal with that?
yeah, I was telling you the story off mic a couple days ago
Yeah.
about like a big dust up in 2005 that I think really encapsulates like this anti-ska fervor. And then we'll kind of get into some of why this dust up matters and where it came from. But in 2005 there was this trend of like outing ska bands, and it starts with this dispute between Brandon Flowers, the lead singer of the Killers, and his like anger towards a band called The Bravery. And you were telling me you remember this band. I don't remember The
I love the
Bravery.
Bravery. I think they're a great band. I don't understand why Brandon Flowers would think this is a Killers wannabe. I don't think they're anywhere close.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking in 2005, the most important thing we can do in life, the biggest issue was to out ska people. Like,
Yeah.
why?
Yeah,
Anyway, go ahead. Go
I
ahead
mean,
with the story.
it was simpler times. I mean, I graduated from college in 2005. Like, there
Shut
was
up, Matt.
nary a care in the world, you know? So anyway, the Bravery were pretty hot at that time. They had this song, An Honest Mistake. It was like, you know, #1 on the pop charts and all that sort of stuff. And Flowers is angry, like you said, because he thought that the Bravery were a Killers wannabe band. And they had this very public tit for tat sort of back and forth, sniping at each other. This is pre-Twitter and pre-online culture. So it's like in interviews and that sort of thing. Finally, Flowers crosses a line and he outs the Bravery as an ex-ska band. And one of the members in particular is like that guy right there. He's an ex-ska musician. And there was like this huge uproar. The Bravery get very angry that they're being called ska musicians. There's this immediate sense of like shame. Spin Magazine writes an article called Skeletons. Get it? Ugh,
I get it.
I hate Spin. Spin sucks. All right, Skeletons in the Closet, stating, quote, "There's nothing cooler than a past spent skanking," and it's very sarcastic.
I was going to say
and
that's a very sarcastic cooler.
it's
Yeah.
just being mean. It's just mean. And so anyway, it turns out Flowers was right. One of the members of the Bravery had been like this dreaded out ska guy in the mid to late 90s for a band called Scabba the Hutt.
First of
Because
all,
remember that all those ska bands had those like stupid ironic names.
I am so listening to this band just because of the name. Nice Star Wars reference.
Oh, then you're gonna love the next one, because it turns out that in all these exposés, the Killers also had a member of a ska band in their lineup as well. Their drummer Ronnie Vanucci, he was in a ska band called Attaboy Skip.
Nice.
Yeah. So here's the thing. There was this big uproar. Everybody's ashamed. And then like Spin goes on to out like literally tens of musicians. Like that guy was in a ska band, and they all have names. And, you remember all those like Skank and Pickle and, the Aquabats, and remember all those ska bands, Real Big Fish, which were actually kind of fun. They were,
I was going to say,
a
they're
good
fun to
live
listen
show,
to. Yeah.
Less Than Jake, right?
Not my favorite.
Mustard Plug. Like, all these bands had these names like this. And there was a lot of anger and outrage in the 90s about these bands. But here's the thing. Like, if ska sucks so bad and people hate ska so much, how come if you just do a Google search for ska music, you'll get hits for 129 million dedicated fan sites?
Well,
right now.
Ska, and I know we're going to talk about this a little more. There is a reason why some people considered ska a joke, but if we really look at ska as the whole, it's actually pretty seriously rooted in history.
Oh, yeah.
And early ska, I would say, is historically very significant and important.
Yeah, it gets back to a concept that we talk about all the time. You love raging on this concept.
Because it's the best, because syncretism is the best. Students may not remember that definition no matter how many times you tell them, but syncretism, it's like all of world history wrapped up in a cute little package with a nice little bow.
That's right. Hit him with that definition one more time.
Cute little package with a nice little bow. Anyway, for those of you who may not know, syncretism basically is just the blending of cultures, and it could be the blending of religions, it could be the blending of it could be the blending of anything that is a cultural aspect in society. Some basic historical examples: Swahili language is a blend of Arabic, I believe, and
like
East African,
kosha, like a Bantu dialects.
Yep, Bantu language. We've got voodoo, which we've talked about in our previous zombie episode, which is a blending of religions. Santeria. Oh, speaking of which, Sublime. Interesting.
There you go.
So what we're talking about here is a blending of different cultures, and ska truly is a great representation of syncretism.
Absolutely. And this is usually the point in the show where we hit them with a little historical context. But
Yeah.
we did say we watched the Vice Media's Noisy series Under the Influence Two-Tone Ska.
Mhm.
And Tim Armstrong, frontman for both Operation Ivy and Rancid, bands we'll talk about a little bit later, like hosts that show. And he does a really good job of breaking down the basic contextual history. In fact, I love using this for teaching context in my classroom. And so we'll go ahead and hit the listener with it right now. And then we'll come back and we'll actually define the genre. And we'll tell you what ska is.
Back in 1655, the sun never set on the British Empire. That year, the British Navy kicked the Spanish out of Jamaica and claimed a large Caribbean island in the name of the mother country. England's colonies from Asia to Africa and throughout the Western Hemisphere helped make it one of the wealthiest, most influential empires the world has ever seen. The 19th century saw England's Industrial Revolution blossom. The rich got richer, and the way the working class works changed forever.
For it is the empire, which includes 1/4 of all the land and of all the peoples of the world, that gives to Britain its position as a first-class power.
Then came the wars. By the time World War II ended, England was badly bruised, looking to its far-flung colonial population to help rebuild. By the time of the 1970s, the influx of immigrants with brown skin led to unprecedented racial tension, with economic downturn and energy crisis putting the country in a state of emergency. The government had put a cap on wages while inflation spiked out of control. Workers went on strike. Power outages were the routine. Battle lines were being drawn along race and class like never before. Post-Empire Great Britain was locked in a struggle to define itself.
I mean, it was kicking off here, man. You know, we had riots in the late 70s, talking massive unemployment, 3-day weeks, rise of the National Front. The popular music of the time was like a million miles removed from the feeling on the street. The cultural climate was pretty dread. Me and the brothers, we had a soundtrack to ease our pain. We had reggae, but my white mates weren't so lucky. So my white mates set about creating a soundtrack that was relevant to their situation, sort of the people, for the people, by the people. London was the centre of the punk rock universe. The Roxy turned out to be the very first live punk rock venue in the UK. It was so early in the whole punk rock scene that there weren't any UK punk records to play. So what am I going to do? I'm going to play something I like. So I'm playing hardcore dub reggae. And this all really came out of the fact that all these white kids grew up with black people living next door. We weren't alien, we weren't exotic, we were their mates. So there was some serious cultural exchange going on.
Talk to me about, I like ska. I like listening to it. I know nothing, and I know like the history behind it and the social movements behind it. I know nothing about the music behind it, and I know you're really into actual creation of music and notes and all that stuff. So what makes ska different?
Right. So ska is a staccato, choppy version of pop, like just a pop rhythms played in 4/4 time, but it's played with a syncopated rhythm, which means that the emphasis is going to be placed not on the first and third notes. Like you think of like any sort of popular song, riffs, the emphasis is always going to be coming in on that first and that third. And guitars, that's going to be your downstroke. However, in ska, as we will see, this guy, Eddie Thornton and Don Drummond, they start to place emphasis on the up notes. That's going to be your 2 and your 4. And if you combine that with like a brass backing band and then a bass line that's going to just be played on like basic scales in 4/4 time, you're going to get something that's infectiously danceable. And that was the point of ska. Ska was supposed to be dance music.
And that's fantastic. Once again, I cannot even begin to understand why people thought this wasn't good.
Yeah. I mean, well,
Okay,
I think it's the name. I think it's the Scab of the Hut thing, because really when we look at ska, first of all, comes forth in these waves.
Right.
And so if we're going to understand ska, we got to go back to the very first wave of ska. And this is where we're going to say right now, we're going to tell the story of this first wave as best we can to throw credit to the musicians that we know.
Mhm.
But as Lariche says in his book, A Brief History of Ska, if you asked 10 different ska musicians from Jamaica where ska came from, you would get 10 different answers. So we're going to do the best we can, but all of our sources disagreed to an extent on exactly where ska came from in terms of like a geographic point and this particular person. What none of them disagreed on was that ska is this syncretic musical form that blended at the time, which is, think like post-World War II, early decolonization time period, 1950s, with, you know, British and American soldiers in the Caribbean and these large radio towers that are going to be blasting music into parts of Jamaica that had never really had a huge amount of access to stuff like big band or Dixieland jazz or American blues music or R&B. And what ended up happening is people started listening to those bands and started to utilize elements of Dixieland jazz, blues, R&B, but they did this in a blended format where you would take like traditional Jamaican musical forms like calypso, which actually comes from Trinidad and Tobago, and it has like French folk music influence because of slavery and all the stuff
Look at
we
that
talked about.
syncretism.
Yeah, exactly. And this other form of music called mento, which is like Jamaican folk music. And you know, what we're really thinking here is like you want to take some of those the like West African drum lines and bass lines, that rhythm section of a band, and you're going to start blending it with American musicians like Dizzy Gillespie or Charlie Parker in terms of the horns. And the place that was done, well, there seems to be some consensus anyway, that the place where this really began to be done was at an orphanage called the Alpha Boys School in Kingston, Jamaica.
Okay, so before we get into that, so what we're looking at here is in terms of like the advent of ska, because of colonization, European colonization, because of U.S. involvement in the Western Hemisphere, Latin America, and Central America, and the Caribbean, as a result of either soldiers being on the islands, as a result of British citizens living in there because of colonization, and then even staying there after post-colonization. They have access to all this Western music. They blend it with Jamaican music, which has got a little Caribbean flair, a little West African flair, and hence we have the birth of ska.
Exactly. And these Alpha Boy guys, particularly a musician that I already name checked, Eddie Thornton, are viewed as the godfathers of ska. They're the guys who are starting to take the elements. They're starting to blend the horn playing. Thornton talks about like he wanted to play fast like Dizzy, but he couldn't play fast. Like he just didn't have that skill set. So he started taking elements of what Gillespie is doing on the trumpet, but he's slowing it down and he's starting to add in more of that rhythm section. This in turn, this like newly forming type of music starts to make its way out into broader Jamaican society. And another musician, Don Drummond, forms a band called first the Satellites, but then quickly renamed the Scatolites, which maybe gives us an idea of where the name for the musical form and genre comes from, but no one really knows for sure.
Yeah.
And Drummond is chiefly responsible for adding the 2/4 syncopated upstroke rhythm that we talked about earlier, right? So Drummond, he adds on this little twist, and all of the sudden you've got this new form of like very distinctly Jamaican music at the same time that Jamaica is finding itself independent from British rule. Right. So it's this perfect like moment for this new national form of music. And ska becomes the music of the revolution.
Yeah, it is. It's ours. It's not British. It's not colonial. It's not Western. This is us.
Right.
I love it.
Unfortunately, though, I mean, because this is still our podcast.
Right. We've
Debbie talked about decolonization before. Things didn't go super well for the Jamaican people. They didn't have a lot of infrastructure. They didn't have a lot of governmental experience. What they did have was a whole metric butt ton of this really red dirt on the island. This dirt is made red by a mineral called bauxite. And bauxite was super important because it's one of the chief ingredients for creating industrial aerospace grade aluminum. And this is post World War II space race.
can't imagine the United States or Britain wants any of that.
The British in particular wanted it, in fact. And so bauxite miners come in and they start offering up all this money for land that used to be farms or plantations, and people sell off the land, but then they have nowhere to go. So they start making their way into cities like Kingston.
Yeah.
But they have nowhere to live. So they find themselves in displaced outskirts, right? Very similar to what we talked about in our Industrial Revolution series in England.
I know the readers can't see this, but I wish they could see my shocked face.
Yeah, I know.
I'm so surprised.
You seem like this is very
I'm
passe.
so surprised this would happen to a post-colonial world.
Right. So what ends up happening is that a lot of these people who are living in these slums, these like, just shanty towns, they are really struggling to find work in Kingston. And what starts to occur is like, let's call it party culture, but it's not like party all the time, but it's like, hey, you have a really hard life and things aren't going really well, and maybe there's an opportunity to find like some friends and get together and dance your blues away. And so ska starts to fuel this rising dance culture, specifically in the outskirts of Kingston, Jamaica. These dance parties that are going to be like fueled in like by like the Scotalites and their recordings are hosted by these men who owned sound systems. And sound system, if you think to like a band like Operation Ivy, who have a whole song called Sound System, and now it's going to lift you back up again, are like these junkyard creation, massive PA, like stereo systems. Think more junkyard than like Best Buy, though.
I think that's cool. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I think it's awesome.
I think that's like the basics of music, like the purity of music.
Yeah, this is it's DIY, man. Make your own scene. Yeah. So a lot of these parties were being hosted places like Trenchtown, one of these major slums. And in Trenchtown, the DJ was able to cover a charge for people to come in and dance their blues away. And what are they dancing to? They're dancing to ska music, right? All the stuff that Thornton and Drummond had created. In fact, Eddie Thornton had utilized this like really favorable immigration policy to leave Jamaica and go to England, because they were like, basically the British were like rebuilding. They're saying like, hey, anybody who's part of the empire or was part of the empire, feel free to immigrate or to England, the British Isles, help us rebuild. So Thornton does that for a time. He's introduced to a lot more popular music. He helps, like infuse like songs like Blue Moon into Jamaica, for example. If you look at anything in the 1960s, like music recordings, like everybody had a version of Blue Moon. Everybody had a version.
So true.
Yeah, and Eddie Thornton did it. But they were also writing their own songs like My Boy Lollipop, which is like 50s sort of trash, but it's got this danceability to it because it's ska. Yeah, exactly. Right. So anyway, these like the scene in Trenchtown starts making actually a lot of money for the people living there, because you could charge, you could sell food, you could sell drinks, you could host, like there was an infrastructure developed around this party culture, to the point where party promoters started to like basically want to nudge in, right? Wherever there's money, there's going to be competition, and like competitive party hosters started hiring unemployed young men in their teens and early 20s called rude boys. And these rude boys would go into these parties, they'd smash up the sound system, and they would basically drive the party goers out. And then the next week, who had a party ready to roll? It was the guy who hired those rude boys. But like, what happens if you're the Trenchtown crew? You have your own rudies. They're going to go smash it all up.
So you're destroying your own music that you just created.
Yep. And unfortunately, that's going to undo first wave ska. There's this degeneration into this more violent sort of what was fun and dancing starts to degenerate into this violent, almost like rival gang mentality. But that's not the only reason the first wave of ska crests and breaks. It's also because ska was really infectious, and people like Don Drummond, who had helped create that sound, had been sharing their music with other musicians. In fact, famously, Drummond used to practice at this factory during his lunch and off times. Like he'd be out there with horns and guitars, and he's creating that staccato 2/4 rhythm that we were talking about. And he's talking to another guy on the shop floor. His name is Bob Marley. And Bob Marley is going to be super important in the history of the creation of reggae. So we start at ska, then we go to reggae, and then reggae turns into like roots reggae, which is like the really religiously informed, deeper, more spiritual version of reggae. And then eventually into a form of music called rock steady, which is like very slowed down, or like hardcore dub reggae.
Yeah.
So there's all these subgenres that come out. And so people stop playing ska and they start moving in these more directions, which signals the success of the genre, right?
Well, yeah,
it
because you
created something
inspired others.
Right. So if that was all, we'd be done with our episode. Hey, that's the story of ska.
But it's not.
But it's not, right? Because what ends up happening is ska moves off the Jamaican shores and it's going to create a second crest in like bands that you were talking about earlier in England. But real fast, before we leave Jamaica, crazy sort of thing. So you know me, I'm into true crime and all that sort of stuff.
And you are.
Don Drummond, the one of the godfathers of ska, the former of the Scotalites, the backing band for the revolution and all that sort of stuff, he would never have any idea the role and influence that his creation would have on popular music across the world. Because you see, right at the height of the Scotalites, right at the place where Drummond should have been that next music impresario, we should be saying his name just like we all know Bob Marley. He killed his girlfriend, right? He had a mental break and killed his girlfriend. And then he was put into an insane asylum, like a mental institution, and he would die there before he had any idea what he created.
Lovely, Matt. Thanks for doing that Debbie Downer.
What are you talking about? This is our podcast.
This is our podcast.
Somebody somewhere is like,
someone's going to get hurt.
Someone's like, sweet deed right there. Thank you, Maureen, for that.
So the second wave of ska is the ska I'm familiar with. That's where I was introduced.
The classic two-tone, yeah.
And I know we the big difference with this, well, there's a bunch of differences, but one of the big differences is this is ska that's going to be made primarily in England, right?
Because completely.
Because we have Jamaican immigrants who are coming to England because England said, come and help us rebuild.
Exactly.
And so they come into England. I know they settle in industrial towns like, let's see, Coventry and Brixton.
Brixton,
right?
yeah. London too, yeah. A lot of those hard scrabble sort of towns, though, yeah.
And then in the 70s, England is, I think, really trying to find itself. It's struggling. First of all, it's really struggling in a lot of different places. And people are economically struggling. There's political issues. And a lot of different types of music come out of that. And the second wave of ska is one of them. Yeah,
absolutely. And you nailed it right on the head. The sociocultural rebellion of that time period gave birth to a couple different forms of music. In particular, the version of ska that starts to get played in places like Coventry, which that town really matters for our story, is this form of music called blue beat ska. And it's kind of like mod infused. Like when you think mods, think like The Who. And it's got the same 2/4 syncopated, like that's always going to be ska's calling card. That's how you know it's ska. And again, listeners, if you're at home, you're like, I'm syncopated, I'm not a music person, and you don't know ska, maybe you know funk, and that funk rhythm is a syncopated rhythm as well. It's that upstroking guitar, that tink sort of sound. It sounds like a highly tuned guitar, and you're hitting that high E string, right? And you're getting this rhythm that the dance beat is on the beat you're not expecting, right? And it creates this sound, right? So anyway, you got blue beat ska, this mod infused sort of thing, but then you have this other form of music that is also an import to England. It comes from like New York, mainly New York in this time period. We're talking about punk. Punk rock makes its way to England as well. And in 1975, those two smaller waves of music converge, and they're going to create the mega wave that is two-tone ska.
And that's the ska I grew up with, and it's phenomenal.
Right. And really it happens. And listen, everybody who's listened to the podcast for a while now knows, like, I'm unashamedly, unabashedly, like a very like hardcore punk rock fan, not just hardcore punk, but like street punk and all this sort of stuff. Like, I love punk rock music. But like really punk plays a huge pivotal role early in the formation of two-tone ska because it's the punk clubs, it's the punk shows that really drive the formation of two-tone ska. Because one of the things you could easily do in 1975, 76, 77 was go to a punk rock show in England, right? You got all these mega bands, the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the Damned, but there's bands everywhere and they're all playing live small venues. And if you know anything about these bands, they're a bunch of kids, they're super disorganized, they have really crappy equipment, and there could be an extended intermission between sets. And the problem was, as like, if you decide like, Stiff Little Fingers just played and you're getting ready for the Dam to play, but the Dam always have like broken equipment. And so they're duct taping everything back together. The last thing you want is like a Chris Christopherson record being played over the PA for everybody to like just
Little
totally
Linda
bring down the mood.
Ronstadt, some ABBA.
Exactly. Right. Because while there was 1,000 punk rock bands, there was like one punk rock album that like and that was really it. And there just wasn't music to be played. And that's where our next major figure in the scene, a man named Don Letts, who was a DJ at this really popular venue called the Roxy, steps forward. Now, he is a son of Jamaican immigrants, and he has reggae in his soul. He has hardcore dub reggae in particular. You heard him talk about it in the Noisy video. That was him. That was Don Letts. Right. And he starts spinning Marley. He's spinning hardcore dub reggae. He's doing, Rocksteady. And a lot of these punk rockers are listening to this music and they're dancing and they're vibing with it as well, to the point where some people start to think like, hey, maybe we should syncretize. Let's smash up punk rock with this reggae and let's form something new. And that takes place in Coventry with a man named Jerry Dammers.
Yeah, because I know you love punk. I know you do, and God bless you. And I love some punk, but you can't really do anything to it. You can't dance to punk. You can't. Right. There's just
you could pogo, and this is so gross. I know
that is not a dance.
You were gonna hate this. You were gonna hate this so much.
I know.
The main thing those English kids were doing at shows, if they weren't pogoing, which is just jumping up and down.
Jumping down, right?
Yeah. They were doing a thing called gobbing, where they would spit huge loogies at the band for the entire show.
That is disgusting.
Oh,
that is so disgusting.
When the Ramones got there in '75, they were like, it was gross.
Did they go peace out?
Things would totally degenerate and there'd be like broken glass and fights, and obviously, right? So yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And Jerry Dammers, right? He's with you on that as well. He's over in Coventry. He's the son of a minister. He's like, hey, we got to do something for the folks. We got to, let's try to infuse something different into the musical scene. And he creates a band called The Specials. And
they're so good.
Yeah, The Specials are great. We'll have some, we'll have a whole playlist and some musical samples here in a second. But The Specials, they break into the scene and they do it with this song called Gangsters, and it's just a very basic 7-inch record. It's one song on one side and one song on the other side for all of our young listeners who have no idea what I'm talking about when I say a 7-inch record.
45,
and so Gangsters, right, it's got the horns, it's got the infectious danceability, it's got the syncopated rhythm, but it also has really aggressive lyrical content, which we're getting from punk, right? And so that's our blend. That's our next blend. So take this two-tone sound and let's blend it with punk rock music, right?
And that becomes why it's, at least for me, why it was important. Not so much back then because I had no idea what the hell they were talking about. I was like 10 or 11 years old. But now when you really listen to it, and I know we haven't talked too much about this in previous episodes, but when Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister, was in control of England, there were some not so great things going on, especially socially and economically. And it hits a lot of English citizens really, really hard. This, I mean, it is widespread. And we know from teaching history, when the economy fails for a great amount of people, nothing else matters.
Absolutely
if you can't
not.
feed your family, if you can't pay your bills, nobody cares about what government system you have. Nobody cares about what religion you practice. All people want is to get food on the table and to pay their bills. And when they can't do that, it's going to come out in the musical lyrics we're going to see in the two-tone ska.
Absolutely. And even past that, one of the things that starts to happen as well inside of England is you have this rise in race-based violence. And so two-tone ska takes on this whole secondary, but like some would
related
say
to the
like
first,
primary sort of role in creating racial unity. And to be a two-tone ska member of the scene, of the two-tone ska scene, you had to have the right dress. You'd proclaim who you are, right? Because like racist games like the National Front or racist skinhead groups, like they had a uniform. You would know who the enemy was.
Oh, yeah.
And they dress out. And the ska people are like, we should do the same thing. So from our ongoing History of Music podcast, we get this quote about the ska look that's created by Dammers, right? From the Gangsters EP cover. Right? It's a cross between a West Indian Rudy boy, a British skinhead, and a British mod. This meant suits, pork pie hats, dark glasses, and white shirts. This whole look, right, was black and white, two-tone. Right.
I
and
love
then
it.
you have
And
the
the
racial
unity.
unity
Yep.
piece. And so you got two-tone there, right? In fact, like they named it the look, the person on the cover, and we'll throw up like an image in the show notes, right? Was named Walt Jabsco. That's what the character was called. And he's this like Peter Tosh modeled, like really and truly Peter Tosh modeled sort of mascot for two-tone ska, and people ate up Gangsters, and they ate up the B-side of that 7-inch, this song called The Selector, right? And the Selector was this all synth, sort of like synth, but also horns and syncopated sort of stuff made by a band with no name. So when people are like, oh, The Selector, who's that by? Who's that by? The musicians were like, it's by us. What's the name of the band? The Selector. So they just named themselves after the song, right? And this creates like this opening salvo of this new wave of two-tone ska. And really, really quickly, Dammers like leverages this into touring dates with like bands like the Gang of Four and the Damned in the late 70s, early 80s. And then 1980s, two-tone ska really, really breaks, and a huge deluge of bands come out of the woodwork. We're talking about bands like the Madness. We're talking about bands, your band, right? The English Beat.
Yeah, I like that.
We've got, like we said previously, the Selector, and people are loving it. Right? They're packing shows. You've got, number one hits. You've got interviews. You've got the scene. You've got it's perfect. It's this perfect moment. And two-tone ska is literally the biggest music movement in England in the 1980s.
Yep. And then, so why doesn't it continue into the 90s? Because it's not there in the 90s.
No, it's not. And what happens in England, sadly, is what happened in Jamaica. The scene, which was supposed to be like peaceful and unity based and all this sort of stuff, devolves into violence, right? You've got thuggish skinheads, you've got racist types, you've got the rise of a new form of punk rock called hardcore, which was a much more violent scene. If you've seen like The Downfall of Civilization, that chronicles like the LA scene in the early 1980s, like it's just much more of a destructive scene. And that combined with the fact that Dammers record label, two-tone record label, started to falter as he became overextended, and the fact that there was a new type of music that came out of like punk, is like that original wave of punk broke. There's something called post-punk, like think bands like Joy Division, New Order, right? Wire, those sorts of bands, they sort of take over. Okay,
and I'm so sorry that two-tone ska declines, but as you know, that next group with The Cure and New Order and all this
that's
stuff,
you.
that is my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, ska, but I'm happy for the rest.
Yeah. So ska ping pongs though back across the Atlantic, and it stays alive in this moment. And it stays alive for a couple of different reasons. And we're not going to get too deep into the details here because it's really, really small and it's really, really fragmented. But there's a couple of things. There's a band called The Outsiders, which are part of this mod revival that start making some noise. They have a song called Get Out of My Way, which is name checked actually by Tim Armstrong in a song called Get Out of My Way for Rancid's 1993 debut album called Rancid, right? Because everybody here is just like, let's just come up with one name and use it until we can't, right? This song gets a lot of like play on the San Francisco airwaves. Armstrong's from the East Bay, right? And so this college radio station, KQAK, The Quake, right? Do you know
that's
that
because
station?
That's because the East Bay rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely it does. And the East Bay is going to be super important here in a couple of seconds.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So there's that going on. Then up in New York, you have a band called The Toasters. The Toasters write a song called Two-Tone Army. And they start to unify all of these like kind of desperate individual ska bands in New York, and they start making their own scene specific sort of thing. There's a movie that chronicles that early two-tone in England scene called the dance craze, which also becomes really important and popular during this time period. Then over in Boston, you've got this really neat thing going on where you have this band called the Mighty Mighty Bosstones. The Mighty Mighty Bosstones are playing this like really aggressive form of ska where they have this like really hardcore shredding guitarist whose like major musical influence are bands like Motorhead, if that gives you any idea of kind of where he's coming from. But they also have this like whole two-tone thing. They bring back the Walt Jabsco sort of thing, but they do it with plaid. So they've got something called the Plaid Army. They're playing this really fast, aggressive version of ska.
Yeah.
I love it too. So when I first started getting into ska, like this form called ska core is what it was called, was something I really got into as well. And that band formed in 1983, right as two-tone was fading.
No idea they were that old. Absolutely no idea.
I mean, they just broke up like last year.
Yeah, I mean, because they're really, really good.
Yeah, totally. And their soundtrack, like if anybody out there is like, maybe I feel like the movie Clueless.
Oh,
right?
exactly.
They're the band in the movie Clueless that they're hanging out with, the live band and all that sort of stuff. And of course, they score a huge breakthrough in 96 with The Impression That I Get, right? 96, 97 off the album Let's Face It, which is like their big breakthrough. Second best album, I don't know. Don't Know How to Party is my favorite. But anyway, so that, Boston was a perfect place for something like this to happen, like a petri dish, because like you had all these Gen Xers who were in college, and Boston has like more colleges per square mile or something like that than anywhere in America. So it was just like, it was perfect. But the place that's probably most important for the third wave of ska, your stomping grounds, we're heading back to California. We're heading to the East Bay, right? We're going to check out a band called Operation Ivy out of Berkeley, right?
Well, yeah, there's just, I think part of the, even growing, because I grew up in the Bay Area in the East Bay, and in a little bit north of the East Bay. But the whole idea was there was so much musical experimentation going on during that time period. And there were so many small little clubs you could go to and listen to these groups. And so,
the Mabuhay Gardens, 924 Gilman, those are some of the legendary spots, right? Yeah. But all up and down the East Bay, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if like people aren't like familiar, like thinking of San Francisco, like flowers in your hair, like the East Bay's hard scrabble, right? The East Bay, Oakland, Berkeley. Oh yeah.
East Bay. Yeah. It's not San Francisco per se. No, that's not how we roll. No.
So the East Bay is a lot harder. And, Operation Ivy was taking its main cues from bands like The Clash. And Clash they're a punk rock band, but they had dabbled in ska, like albums like London Calling, Combat Rock. They had a couple of EPs, Black Market Clash and Super Black Market Clash. The like draw from Don Lutz and all that stuff we were talking about earlier. Op Ivy becomes part of this musical explosion starting in 1987. Tim Armstrong, when he's playing with Rancid, in 1996, 95, 96 for the album And Out Come the Wolves, he has a song called Journey to the End of the East Bay. And he says, song lyrics started in 87, ended in 89. So Op Ivy's a really short-lived band, but they are widely credited with helping the third wave of ska break through, because there's people all over who started listening to this like, oh, dude, I love this thing. I love this type of music. Specifically, people down south in California in a place called Orange County.
And I know. This is not going to be Matt's favorite top. We have a very strong, I wouldn't say strong disagreement. But when we're about to talk about Orange County ska, we know the number one band, like we do.
It's Apple Core. That's the name of the band, right? No. That was their first name. Then they had this keyboard player named Eric, and he was really important for the band too, right? That's what you're thinking about?
Yeah.
Right? Or I know who you're thinking about. You're thinking about Eric's little sister and the band that she fronts a little bit later on.
Correct. So Matt, what we're talking about here is No Doubt. No Doubt will be the absolute key representation of Orange County ska. And I think there's probably some hardcore ska people who don't necessarily consider it ska. From a female perspective, this was an extremely influential band. Not that No Doubt was the first, female-led male band or anything like that. It's not. but the play that No Doubt got and the vibe that Gwen Stefani gave off was, I mean, true. I think it's inspirational for women. It's same time Alanis Morissette was coming out, all this different stuff, but truly inspirational.
Sure.
And if nothing else, even if you don't love Orange County ska, nobody can deny that, God, could you dance to No Doubt?
Oh yeah, and No Doubt did their own thing, right? Because when No Doubt first started, when they were Apple Corps, and later when Eric Stefani was the keyboardist, he left the band after they had their first major label release that like totally flopped. He actually went on to become an animator for The Simpsons, so he did okay.
That's kind of cool, yeah.
But yeah, so Gwen takes over as the lead singer. And they start to lean into more of like what Operation Ivy was doing, which is like, hey, we're going to be playing ska, but we don't have horns. We're not doing horns.
No, yeah.
We're going to play a much faster tempo, right? And we're going to kind of keep it real with the lyrical content, the way the guys in Op Ivy had been doing in 87 to 89 off their seminal album Energy. And it worked because the first Gwen Stefani fronted No Doubt album, which is technically their second album, Tragic Kingdom, broke through in a big way. Sold 16 million albums.
It's really good.
Yeah, it is good. But I think the success of Tragic Kingdom, and to an extent, like Green Day's Dookie as well, creates this moment. Again, and listen, listener, like I'm a huge Rancid fan. I just am. And so like this moment is encapsulated by the name of Rancid's third album, And Out Come the Wolves, which talks about this idea that once bands like Green Day and No Doubt hit it big, every major record label wanted some sort of ska punk or like pop punk, skate punk sort of like catalog that they could go out there. And this creates that goofy ska band moment that we were talking about at the beginning, right? Because you had all these bands that were maybe not that good, that slapped a couple horns on, because I played music with this guy from high school for a little bit and he has a saxophone and let's just do it. Band named Propaganda from Canada will write a song called Ska Sucks, talking about like how this is all this big huge fan, and that's a pretty complex song actually, because it talks a lot about like neo-Nazi culture and what was going on in the Canadian scene. But anyway, the point of all of this is that ska blows up by like 97. I want to say there was ska, right, and you had all these goofy bands with all these goofy names, and they're trying to take themselves seriously. Like Skanking Pickle, for example, they will have something called like Skas Against Racism or something like that. But it's a music festival. It totally flops because everybody's just looking for that commercial marketability. And every festival, every record store was playing this really goofy Aquabats. If there's any Travis Barker fans out there, Aquabats was Travis Barker's first band, so like I just outed him as a ska musician as well. But like everybody was playing some ska, but there were very few bands who were doing it really, really well. And I remember you were talking about like your sort of stuff, even here in Denver, which like in the mid 90s didn't have like a super robust alt music scene, and it was really more like folksy sort of stuff. That if there was anything, we had a local ska band, Five Iron Frenzy, that actually made it kind of big as well during that time period. But everybody had a band, everybody had their scene, right? And ska just kind of burned out, and as a result.
This is why we get the bad name, because you're saying that everybody was playing ska, and I would argue everybody was calling themselves ska, but they weren't ska, and there were so many. I mean, I'm going to drop a swear word here because it really made, there are so many shitty bands
that
really call
were
themselves ska. And then if you're a serious music aficionado, or even not a serious music aficionado, you really just liked original ska, you look at this and you're like, what a pile of crap. Not everybody, but enough of it to where that's why people turn against it, because they look at ska as this, what I don't even know what.
Because you had these really good bands. So you had bands like, I was at Punk Rock Bowling this summer in Las Vegas at the start of the summer, and it was really awesome because there was all these old ska bands and all these bands that I hadn't seen in a long time. So you had bands like Hepcat and Fishbone. Those were really good ska bands. Those are like really good ska bands. And then some of the really good ones as well burned out, like Sublime. right? Sublime,
Well, that's 'cause they're
unfortunately, Bradley Knowles dies.
Didn't he die of a
right
drug overdose?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right before Sublime breaks through. And that, like, you listen to that breakthrough album and like they are a ska band, right?
Oh,
And
totally.
Rancid does And Out Come the Wolves, and they have like these massive ska songs, like Time Bomb, for example.
Mhm.
That is just a straight up ska song, right?
Oh,
And
totally.
it is like getting major play on the radio. There were bands out there doing it well, but for every like, Fishbone or Hepcat or Sublime or Rancid, there was like 70 bands that you were just like on those side stages at
Oh, they're
Warped Tour and stuff
terrible.
like that you were just like, I don't want to hear this, right?
Yeah.
And ska really, petered out, and it became this big joke. I remember watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine a couple years back. It was probably like 8 years back because I'm getting old now. But like where there's like Andy Sandberg's all dressed up in two-tone. He's like, "Ska's my life, and I will always be with ska forever, and nothing will ever take ska away from me." And obviously the joke is like, he's just a bandwagon fan and it'll go
Yeah.
away. But like the reality is even though when third wave ska crests and finally breaks in the United States, it's still, because we talked about this in our globalization series, like
Mhm.
the mass export of culture meant that form of
I
ska
think
made its way around
is,
the world. And so
we have a
you
little glitch here, but
vibrant
what it really
scenes
comes down to
today in
is
places like Mexico and Argentina, Latin America in general is just like in love with ska music. But there's also really good ska bands in the United States. My daughter's favorite band, I've seen them like 5 times. They're a legit good ska band, ska punk band, the Interrupters. There's some good ska
they're
being
okay.
played right
I
now.
don't know if I don't know
They're a
with the
good ska
Interrupters.
punk band. Like they're a good ska punk band.
I
You gotta
will
see
give them
live.
another listen to. I will
And
give
that's
them
the other
another
thing.
listen to.
As we get ready to sign off thing, remember, like we were talking about this before, like bands like Les and Jake, like those bands were all the good ska bands were good because they were good live. And I think that matters for ska music. It was a
Mhm.
dance music at first. Tim Armstrong has, like, when he talks about seeing the movie Dance Craze, and he's like, we all got up out of our seats at the movie theater and just started dancing. Like, and he's like, who the hell does that? Right. At a movie. Because at the end of the day, ska is about that feeling that is invoked when you have live music and you're in the scene and you're enjoying yourself. And I think that really matters as well. And I think that's why so many of those bad bands flopped, 'cause when they were live, they just weren't good. Couldn't dance, couldn't skank, couldn't crank. No good.
And ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for us for this episode. As always, thank you for listening to us. You can listen to us on Spotify, on iTunes. Where else, Matt?
Google, Stitcher, a couple of those other places. You can
excellent.
check us out at Spotify Podcasts. It used to be Anchor, rebranded like some months back. That's our hosting site, so you can check out our website over there. We also would be remiss if we didn't thank our friends over at Abington Ridge Collective for our great intro and outro music. And then, for more information on ska, we're going to throw some stuff up in the show notes and in the description. We got a playlist that we'll throw up for you guys, a really cool scatter plot for ska and all these bands that we were talking about and how they connect to each other. So if you're like a visual math person, we've got like a pretty cool visual there for you. And then we'll also throw up the link for the Noisy, series Under the Influence, because for 35 minutes, it's a great like mini documentary. And if you're looking to get introduced, you should be. One of my proudest moments as a teacher, I talked about the sad piece, but last year, I guess 2 years ago now, I had a student leaving, and he was like, last day of school, and he's walking out the door. He said, "Hey, Mr. Warren, I just got one thing to say about this whole school year." And I was like, "All right, what's up, man?" And he's like, "Thanks for introducing me to ska music." And I was like, "That's what's up." And so ska is still generating fans the worldwide. So check out some of the stuff we got for you guys. Hopefully you'll find your new favorite song.